ਸਾਰੇ ਲੋਕ ਨੇ ਇਹੋ ਜਿਹੇ ਜਿਨ੍ਹਾਂ ਦੇ ਕ੍ਰਿਮੀਨਲ ਰੈਕਡ ਨੇ ਜਾਂ ਕੋਈ ਇਹੋ ਜਿਹੀ ਗੱਲਬਾਤ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ ਕੀਤੀ ਹੋਈ ਆ ਜਿੱਥੇ ਅਮਰੀਕਾ ਉਹ ਜਾ ਨਹੀਂ ਸਕਦੇ ਸੋ ਇਹ ਤੁਹਾਡਾ ਰੈਕਡ ਵੇਵ ਕਰਵਾ ਸਕਦੇ ਨੇ ਅਤੇ ਤੁਹਾਨੂੰ ਅਮਰੀਕਾ ਜਾਣ ਦੀ ਇਜਾਜ਼ਤ ਮਿਲ ਸਕਦੀ ਹੈ when you get the clearance it's erased from their record or still it shows there they don't say anything.
It's not so much it's erased, it's quote unquote waived, more so temporarily waived. So I'm going to just grab one city out of the air. Let's say Lahore. So let's say if a guy's from Lahore, he goes to the USA, he gets married, it's a fake marriage, he gets denied, and then he decides to leave the USA after the case is done. But the problem is because he did misrepresentation, because it's a fake marriage, he is now permanently inadmissible to the United States and needs a waiver, not just one time, for the rest of his life, essentially. Waivers are generally good for between 1 and 5 years. So if they get a 5-year waiver, that's great. If they get a 1-year waiver, they have to do it again in a year. But that misrepresentation is something people really need to be aware of. When you get caught making false statements at the U.S. border, you are banned for the rest of your life.
What's the actual procedure? Just you fill one form and then you process it, or you have to go to the court? Like, what is the actual procedure?
Well, just imagine a gentleman has a conviction for drug trafficking. So we have to, there's one form that goes along with it, but we have to also demonstrate that he's rehabilitated. Rehabilitation, it's all case specific. So someone who has drug trafficking, they're looking at different rehab than the same gentleman I told you that has the crimes with the small children. So the guy with the trafficking, they want to basically make sure that he's not going to do the same thing again. So we have to do a detailed analysis to show why he deserves to be approved.
Ken Scott ਸਾਡੇ ਨਾਲ ਸ਼ਾਮਲ ਹੋ ਰਹੇ ਨੇ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਕਿ ਅਮਰੀਕਾ ਦੇ ਸੀਨੀਅਰ US ਇਮੀਗ੍ਰੇਸ਼ਨ ਲਾਅ ਇੰਟੈਲੀਜੈਂਸ ਐਨਾਲਿਸਟ ਨੇ ਬਹੁਤ ਸਾਰੇ ਲੋਕ ਨੇ ਇਹੋ ਜਿਹੇ ਜਿਨ੍ਹਾਂ ਦੇ ਕ੍ਰਿਮੀਨਲ ਰੈਕਡ ਨੇ ਜਾਂ ਕੋਈ ਇਹੋ ਜਿਹੀ ਗੱਲਬਾਤ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ ਕੀਤੀ ਹੋਈ ਆ ਜਿੱਥੇ ਅਮਰੀਕਾ ਉਹ ਜਾ ਨਹੀਂ ਸਕਦੇ ਸੋ ਇਹ ਤੁਹਾਡਾ ਰੈਕਡ ਵੇਵ ਕਰਵਾ ਸਕਦੇ ਨੇ ਅਤੇ ਤੁਹਾਨੂੰ ਅਮਰੀਕਾ ਜਾਣ ਦੀ ਇਜਾਜ਼ਤ ਮਿਲ ਸਕਦੀ ਹੈ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ ਬਹੁਤ ਸਾਰੇ ਕੇਸਿਸ ਇਹੋ ਜਿਹੇ ਕੀਤੇ ਨੇ ਔਰ ਜਿੱਥੇ ਕਾਫੀ ਲੋਕ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਅਪਰਾਧੀ ਪਿਛੋਕੜ ਵਾਲੇ ਸਨ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਵੀ ਅਮਰੀਕਾ ਜਾਣ ਦੀ ਇਜਾਜ਼ਤ ਦਵਾਈ ਹੈ ਜਦੋਂ ਖੁੱਲ੍ਹ ਕੇ ਆ ਜਾ ਸਕਦੇ ਸਨ ਕਿਵੇਂ ਉਹ ਕਰਦੇ ਨੇ ਇਸ ਪ੍ਰੋਸੈਸ ਦਾ ਨਾਂ ਕੀ ਹੈ ਅਤੇ ਕਿਵੇਂ ਕੀਤਾ ਜਾ ਸਕਦਾ ਇਸ ਬਾਰੇ ਉਹ ਦੱਸਣਗੇ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਲੋਕ ਭਾਵੇਂ ਕੋਈ ਟਰੱਕ ਡਰਾਈਵਰ ਹੈ ਜਾਂ ਕੋਈ ਵਿਅਕਤੀ ਨੇ ਉੱਥੇ ਅਮਰੀਕਾ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਵਿਆਹ ਕਰਵਾਇਆ ਹੋਇਆ ਸੀ ਉਹ ਇੱਥੇ ਆ ਗਿਆ ਉਹਦਾ ਕੇਸ ਖਰਾਬ ਹੋ ਗਿਆ ਜਵਾਬ ਦੇ ਦਿੱਤਾ ਸੀ ਹੁਣ ਅਮਰੀਕਾ ਨਹੀਂ ਜਾ ਸਕਦੇ ਜਾਂ ਕੋਈ ਕਿਸੇ ਕਿਸਮ ਦਾ ਕ੍ਰਾਈਮ ਕੀਤਾ ਹੋਇਆ ਉਹ ਕ੍ਰਾਈਮ ਦਾ ਰੈਕਡ ਵੇਵ ਕਰਕੇ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਅਮਰੀਕਾ ਆ ਜਾ ਸਕੋਗੇ Ken, good morning.
Hello, sir. How are you?
Very good. Thank you very much. Thank you for coming in here.
No problem.
And tell us more about your line of work. What do you do?
Well, basically, people who are Canadians who are inadmissible to the United States, we get them cleared to enter the U.S. And inadmissibility can be for various reasons. Could be for criminality, could be for misrepresentation, could be for health reasons, could be for mental health issues, could be for drug addiction. The list is almost endless. So it pretty much depends upon why you are inadmissible, and we can get you cleared. So in a nutshell, we get you cleared to enter the USA.
Mm-hmm. And when you get the clearance, it's erased from their record, or still it shows there, they don't say anything?
It's not so much it's erased, it's quote unquote waived, more so temporarily waived. So for example, if someone needs a waiver for drug possession, it's temporarily waived for a period of 1 to 5 years. So if they get a 5-year waiver, after 5 years, they need to get waived again. So you're not really cleared permanently per se. So it's still there. So it's just basically a temporary waiver, so to speak.
Mm-hmm. So if a truck driver is restricted to go to the United States for 5 years, let's say,
yes,
you can get them a waiver for 5 years, then you have to renew it?
It depends. A lot of times, a lot of the truck drivers, I'll use Sir as an example, some of the drivers have a habit of doing what they call cabotage or point-to-point interstating driving. Basically, if you take a load of apples from Surrey down to California, that's allowed, and pick up a load of grapes from California, bring to Canada, that's allowed. But some of the truck drivers go from Surrey, They stop in Portland, pick up a load, take that to California, or depart California, pick up a load of radishes, drop that in Yakima, and then come back to Canada, and that's not allowed. So they get what's called an expedited removal and a 5-year ban. So after the 5 years, sometimes they need a waiver, sometimes they do not. It's really case by case. The ones who need the waiver after the 5 years, that's usually for misrepresentation because they've given some kind of false statement at the border and the guard has caught it that renders the person permanently inadmissible to the United States.
There are people here in Surrey, they married an American girl, then they wanted to be permanent, but they were rejected, their case was rejected, they said it's a fake marriage. So then they came back to Canada.
Yes.
And they're living here happily, but still cannot go there because of that record.
What happens, and what we've seen in the office, it tends to be, or quite often, is people, we see certain cities keep coming up constantly. So I'm going to just grab one city out of the air. Let's say Lahore. So let's say if a guy's from Lahore, he goes to the USA, he gets married, it's a fake marriage, he gets denied, and then he decides to leave the USA after the case is done. But the problem is because he did misrepresentation, because it's a fake marriage, he is now permanently inadmissible to the United States and needs a waiver, not just one time, for the rest of his life, essentially. That misrepresentation is something really, really bad, and people really should be aware of it. We get it all the time at the office, at the Surrey office.
Mm-hmm. And a lot of gangsters here in Vancouver area, they have approached you, I understand, and you got them the waiver.
Well, a lot of individuals who used to be in the game, so to speak, they've left the game, they've been rehabilitated. Then what happens is they cannot enter the U.S. because of their past, and we've gotten a lot of guys cleared from the, I'll say the 90s, 2000s. They're people from that era who made the headline news nightly. Those individuals and their associates, we've gotten cleared. So once you've left your industry, so to speak, and now you are a rehabilitated Canadian citizen, then we can get you cleared. But we cannot get you cleared if you're still in your industry.
Mm-hmm. So some people went to USA in 2010. They got the asylum, and after that they came back. After filling their case, they came back to Canada in 2011. They left the country. Can they go back?
Yes and no, it really depends. Quite often we get people who come from overseas, they go to the USA, they file asylum, it gets denied, they appeal. While appeal is pending, they find a girl, let's say here in Surrey, they get married, and then 10 years later they try to re-enter. But the officer says to them, you cannot re-enter until you get your old asylum case sorted out. Basically, quite often what happens is those same people have done misrepresentation, fake name, fake passport, fake information, et cetera, et cetera. So because they're inadmissible for misrepresentation, which I said before is a permanent lifetime ban, they have to get this waiver for the rest of their lives. And remember, waivers are generally good for between 1 and 5 years. So if they get a 5-year waiver, that's great. If they get a 1-year waiver, they have to do it again in a year. But that misrepresentation is something people really need to be aware of. When you get caught making false statements at the U.S. border, you are banned for the rest of your life.
Mm-hmm. So marijuana is legal here in Canada.
Yes.
In certain states it's legal too. But when you go on the border and they ask you and you tell them the truth, yes, I do smoke weed, what happens?
Well, I was a federal officer in Washington State, and I was a law enforcement officer and trainer there. I live here in Surrey now. Marijuana has not been legalized by Joe Biden yet, by the U.S. president. So it's still illegal federally. So even though Mr. Trudeau has legalized it here in Canada, that's great. But the minute you tell a U.S. officer that you smoke marijuana, whether it's in Canada, or whether it's in Amsterdam, or whether it's in Norway, you are inadmissible based on the regulations, because the fact that regulations state, in simple terms, whatever relevant convictions you have and whatever you voluntarily admit to. So if you voluntarily admit to, let's say, robbing the Bank of Montreal in Abbey, even though you've never been caught, you are inadmissible for your voluntary admission. So it's the same with the marijuana. You've admitted to smoking the marijuana, so you are permanently inadmissible for your voluntary admission.
What if the person says, I want to go to Oregon?
Well, the same thing. It's in the USA. You're still inadmissible to the U.S. If you're at Peace Arch, you say, yes, officer, I took a toke last night on some green stuff. You are permanently inadmissible for the rest of your life. But now, when they legalize marijuana federally, that might be a different story. But as of right now, you are permanently inadmissible for life.
So then you apply on their behalf?
We prepare their waivers to try to get them cleared to enter the U.S. And as of 2021, we do have a 100% success rate. So it's really case specific. Some people we can get cleared quicker. Some people take longer. There's a gentleman in Toronto. He has crimes I can't really describe here on the radio, but involves small children. So his case is going to be a lot more work than the guy here in Surrey who stole a car at 19. Now he's 40. So it's all case specific. There's many things that go into these waivers, not just filling out the form. Many things that go, in this process.
So why do some convictions need a waiver and others don't?
Generally speaking, if it's what's called a crime involving moral turpitude or an aggravated felony, those crimes require a waiver. So, for example, if you have a mischief conviction, you do not need a waiver. If you have a drug trafficking conviction, you do. If you got car theft, you need a conviction. You need a waiver. So it really depends on what you have. Mischief, simple assault, things along that lines, you don't really need a waiver because those are not considered serious, believe it or not.
What's the actual procedure? Just you fill one form and then you process it, or you have to go to the court? Like, what is the actual procedure?
Well, just imagine a gentleman has a conviction for drug trafficking. So we have to, there's one form that goes along with it, but we have to also demonstrate that he's rehabilitated. Rehabilitation, it's all case specific. So someone who has drug trafficking, they're looking at different rehab than the same gentleman I told you that has the crimes with the small children. So the guy with the trafficking, they want to basically make sure that he's not going to do the same thing again. So we have to do a detailed analysis to show why he deserves to be approved and why he will not do it again. And believe it or not, for the trafficking, it's not as hard as people think to get cleared.
Sir, Ken Scott ਆਏ ਹੋਏ ਨੇ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਕਿ ਤੁਹਾਨੂੰ ਅਮਰੀਕਾ ਜਾਣ ਲਈ ਜੇ ਕ੍ਰਿਮੀਨਲ ਰੈਕਡ ਆ ਜਾਂ ਕੋਈ ਇਹੋ ਜਿਹੀ ਗੱਲਬਾਤ ਹੋਈ ਆ ਜਾਂ ਅਮਰੀਕਾ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਇੱਥੇ ਵਾਪਸ ਆਏ ਹੋਏ ਤੁਹਾਡਾ ਕੇਸ ਫੇਲ ਹੋ ਗਿਆ ਉੱਥੇ ਵਾਪਸ ਜਾਣ ਲਈ ਵੇਵਰ ਲੈ ਕੇ ਦੇ ਸਕਦੇ ਨੇ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਫਿਰ ਤੋਂ ਅਮਰੀਕਾ ਆਉਣ ਜਾਣ ਲੱਗ ਸਕਦੇ ਹੋ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਨਾਲ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਕੰਟੈਕਟ ਕਰ ਸਕਦੇ ਹੋ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਦਾ ਟੈਲੀਫੋਨ ਨੰਬਰ ਨੋਟ ਕਰ ਲਓ 1-888-908-3841 ਤੇ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਕਾਲ ਕਰ ਸਕਦੇ ਹੋ ਇੱਥੇ ਸਰੀ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਦਾ ਦਫ਼ਤਰ ਹੈਗਾ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਡਾਇਰੈਕਟ ਲਾਈਨ 'ਤੇ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਕਾਲ ਕਰ ਸਕਦੇ ਹੋ 604-562-8140 7164 120 ਸਟਰੀਟ ਅਤੇ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਜਾ ਕੇ ਮਿਲ ਵੀ ਸਕਦੇ ਹੋ ਪਰ ਅਪੋਇੰਟਮੈਂਟ ਬਣਾਉਣੀ ਪੈਂਦੀ ਪਹਿਲਾਂ ਅਪੋਇੰਟਮੈਂਟ ਬਣਾਉਣ ਲਈ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਨਾਲ ਗੱਲਬਾਤ ਕਰਨੀ ਹੋਏ ਤਾਂ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਦੇ ਦਫ਼ਤਰ US ਐਂਟਰੀ ਵੇਵਰ ਸਰਵਿਸਿਜ਼ 'ਤੇ ਜਾਣ ਲਈ 604-562-8140 'ਤੇ ਟੈਲੀਫੋਨ ਕਰ ਸਕਦੇ ਹੋ So how come some people get a 5-year, some get less than 5?
Case in point, one gentleman got a 6-month waiver, but because his crime involved fighting and knives, so to speak, it was a pretty serious crime. So they want to basically see that you're rehabilitated. So they give you a certain amount of time to make sure that you're okay. A lot of drug trafficking ones get 1 year. So they want to basically keep an eye on you because every time you do a waiver, it's essentially a reassessment. So let's say if someone had drug trafficking conviction, they want to check you out a year later to make sure you're not back in the game, so to speak. And then after maybe 2 or 3 waivers, then they give you a 5-year. Then it's okay, he's fine. He's not likely to get back in the game. So it's basically kind of like a time period where they want to keep an eye on you. If that makes any sense.
So you need somebody to represent you to get the waiver?
Well, you can do the waiver yourself. The problem is, me being a former federal officer and former law enforcement officer and trainer previously stationed in Washington State, we know how these officers think. We've got their regulations, manuals, statutes. We have all that stuff in our office. So the way we get people cleared is based upon the regulations. So, for example, the same techniques they use to get you denied entry or prosecuted, we use the same techniques in reverse to keep you guys cleared. And that's one reason why our phone keeps ringing off the hook. We actually have too much business. So can you do it yourself? Yes. If you've got all the knowledge, if you understand the statutes, if you have the regulations, if you know how to present it properly. If you don't do it properly, you're done.
So would you give your telephone number or address here in Surrey?
Yes, if anyone out there would like to chat with us, my direct number is 604-562-8140, and the office is at 7164 120th Street. That's Scott and 72nd, and we're about 1 unit down from Dr. Chima. So if you leave Dr. Chima's office, turn left, walk maybe 4 seconds, you're right there at our front door.
Oh, your neighbor, Dr. Gulzar Chima.
Oh, yeah, I know him.
Oh.
Nice gentleman. Nice gentleman.
Thank you, Ken. Thank you very much.
No, my pleasure.